Hello. This is my first time wearing a fancy mic, which sounds like it might be having a few issues because my child was playing with it. Sorry. But I feel like I've made it. I've never wore one of these before. And I'm like, am I like a pop star now? Because that's how I feel. I'm Meghan. I noticed she did not pronounce my last name because no one can. It's Tschanz. I get that question a lot. It's like Tschanz with an accent, like a British accent, because there's a lot of accents out there. But yeah, so my name is Meghan. I am a wife to Dustin, which you probably saw him earlier, and a mom to Emmy Lou. She was the little girl that was like walking down the aisles and flirting with everyone. She's so cute. I love her. I am the host of the Faith and Feminism podcast, as they mentioned, author of Women Rising, and some other names that I have been called, or maybe some names that perhaps you've been called, are heretic. Anyone ever been called that? Okay, yeah? Cool, I'm not the only one. Cool. Jezebel. Any Jezebels in here? Woke. I've been called woke as well. So I feel like this is a good place for me to speak because I think maybe a lot of us, just based on the welcoming nature of this church, knows that not all churches are welcoming. Not all of them are kind. And sometimes if you step outside the line, you get cast out. And so that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm going to be talking to y'all about exile. Both being the exile that we might experience from certain communities and the exile that we also do to ourselves. So to begin, I grew up in the conservative evangelical church. There was something really appealing about it, like my 5-year-old mind. Is that my child? This idea that if I accepted Jesus into my heart, that everything would be great after that, right? Isn't that what we're told? That like if we say the prayer, like we're fixed? Just me? Okay, well, I was told that. And I think there was something really appealing about that because I knew even at a young age that maybe something about me wasn't completely healed or whole. There's something about me that wasn't right. And I got that message from the church first and foremost because I was not what I was supposed to be. I was loud and I was outspoken and extremely, extremely competitive. And I was told I shouldn't be that as a girl. Before I get into the nitty-gritty of my story, I do want to share a story of Jesus because I think a lot of us take comfort in well, obviously Jesus, because he's great, but the fact that he chose to hang out with the outcasts and the sinners. So I'm going to read Matthew 9:10-14. They told me I could have slides, but I said no. And so you can maybe read this on your phone, or you can just trust that I'm reading the Bible. Okay. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have come not to call the righteous, but sinners." And so that's the end of that little bit that I'm going to read to you. So in this story, Jesus is hanging out with the folks that he shouldn't. In this story, the sinners, tax collectors, basically those that the religious elite looked on as outcasts. These are the bad guys, like don't spend time with them. They're sinners, they're evil. And what Jesus does is, when he's called out for hanging with these people that he shouldn't, Jesus says in admonition, "I desire mercy, not sacrifice." Which to me, I think reads, I desire compassion, love, kindness, not judgment in the binaries that many religious elite folks have created to say who is in and who is out. I unfortunately know what it's like to be deemed an outcast by the religious elite, if you couldn't tell from the names I've been called earlier. I also have more names, but I didn't think they were appropriate to share here tonight. And I also know what it's like to be loved by them. I know what it's like to be loved and to hide who I am because I needed belonging more than I needed authenticity. And I also know what it's like to be hated by them quite suddenly when I could no longer be silent. I, like I said, was raised in the conservative evangelical church, told from a young age that my primary purpose on earth was to serve men, that I was to grow up and be a happy, silent, submissive housewife. Those were basically my options. I wasn't allowed to teach or preach or lead. And I never foresaw myself in front of an audience as I am now, because I knew to do such a thing would cost me my belonging, and that was too precious to me. So from a young age, I was naturally inquisitive. I asked all the wrong questions, like, do dogs go to heaven? And I was told they don't, which I just don't think is true, but whatever. I was outspoken, I was competitive. At school, I was like beating all of the boys in their push-up contests, and that's not even an exaggeration. I was actually winning. I would race them, and I just felt like outside the church, I could be me. But inside the church, I had to be small. I had to shrink. So I shrank, and I shrank, and I shrank, and I told myself, if this is what God wanted of me, then I would be that. But I prayed that there was another way. So I go on through high school trying to be perfect, trying to be silent, trying to be submissive, trying to be all of these things that I was told as a woman I should be. And so I get to college, and I go to school for journalism, and I graduate just as newspapers died. So you remember when that was all over the news? Yeah, that was when I graduated. And so I was like, great, what do I do with my life? I don't know if you've heard that they call the millennial generation the unluckiest, because we graduate and there's no jobs, and then we're finally ready to buy a house, but we can't afford any of them. So that was me. I felt like I wasted my college degree, but I did really love God, and I said, you know what, I'll be a missionary. And I have some qualms with that now, which I don't have time to get into, but I will say that I became a missionary. And so one of these programs I did gave me the opportunity to travel all around the world working with oppressed women. And so I worked with women and girls who had survived FGM, female genital mutilation, sex trafficking, little girls getting trafficked in India. And every country that I went to, I noticed that the climate might change, the food definitely changed, the culture changed, but something never did, and that was that women were treated like subhuman. They were second-class citizens everywhere. And I thought it was just me. I thought that maybe I was just imagining it in the church I grew up in, but when I saw it again and again and again, I started to notice a tie. And what was more confusing is that my church told me God's order was that men were in charge and women served them. But when I saw these cultures, certain cultures lived this out verbatim, I saw rape, I saw abuse, I saw violence, and I started to notice this tie. And so I went back to these trusted leaders and I said, hey, I'm noticing that women in these situations are really being harmed. I don't know if patriarchy is really what God wants of us. And they're like, no, Meghan, you're wrong. This is just people doing patriarchy wrong, right? If you do it right, then no one gets hurt, everyone lives their happy life. But what I didn't see at the time, that patriarchy was actually the problem. It wasn't people doing patriarchy wrong. Patriarchy in and of itself was the problem. This became very clear to me when I was in the Philippines. I was working with women who had been sexually exploited. To give a little context of what's happening in the area I was in, climate change is happening. We've seen the fires, we've seen the floods, we've seen the hurricanes. What's obviously happening also in the Philippines, and there's a lot of these outlying islands where families live off the land, they farm the land, and that's how they survive. But there's having these massive typhoons coming, and they're just wiping out entire villages, entire communities, and the families will starve unless they send their children to the city. their oldest children to the city. And so what was happening is these older, educated girls would go to the city and without a proper education became easy prey for traffickers. And so I was partnering with an organization that would help them get a college degree and move into a safe house and provide support for their family. And so it was there that I was talking to a man, an American man, and he was asking us why we were there, and we told him, and we turned the question back on him, and we said, "Why are you here?" And he said, as he had his arm draped around like probably a 16-year-old girl, "I come here to get the respect that I deserve, that men deserve respect and to be served, and that women should be submissive to them. And women in the United States don't know their place, so I come to get the respect I deserve here." And he went on a really long rant about this. You probably know someone like him. And as he spoke, I was like, where have I heard this before? This is so familiar. Where have I heard this before? And it hit me like a ton of bricks that I had heard it from all of my evangelical pastors growing up. And that was a moment of no return. I felt like I could no longer be part of a system, even if it had a God stamp on it that harmed women. If I really cared about all of these women that I had worked with, I couldn't be part of it anymore. So I quit my job. I started a podcast called Faith and Feminism, which, by the way, the day it was released, got 3 one-star reviews. I have my theories on who did this, but I don't actually know. And my friends, not all of my friends, I have some good friends here, a lot of my friends and family turned against me. They thought I was Jezebel, sending people to hell, that I was bringing people with me. And I was really struggling with that. Suddenly, this community that had been everything to me decided I was no longer one of them, that I was the one gossiped about in the corners. I was the one whispered about. And I was really, really struggling with this on my 30th birthday. I went to Starbucks. I'm like, I'm going to just journal my thoughts. I'm going to be okay. I'm going to talk to God. And I got a message from one of my old friends. I was actually in her wedding. And I'm like, oh, she's going to say something encouraging and sweet to me. I can't wait to read this message. And I open it. And it's just a very long message about how I am ushering, sending people away from God, that she can't be tied to the liberal agenda. Basically, that God was against me, that God was against the work that I was doing. And I immediately started crying. I felt like maybe God is against me. Maybe I am wrong. Maybe like all of these people are saying, maybe I'm the wrong one. Maybe God is a big fan of patriarchy. And I remember going to the car, just sobbing. I can't drive home because I'm crying too hard. And this woman knocks on my window. This woman, I have no idea who she is. And I'm crying so hard, I can't even ask her why she's knocking on my window. And I just felt compelled to get out. And she immediately pulls me into a hug and just prays over me, "I'm not going to leave until you know how loved you are. I'm not going to leave until you know how loved you are." And I just sobbed into her shirt with snot and mascara. And I don't honestly even know what she looks like. But I do know that when I felt that God was against me and the world was against me, that God showed me that he was still with me and that he was still guiding me. And you know what? I wish I could end the story there. The end, great. Okay, God loves me. I never struggled again. But that's not life, right? As James said earlier, there's always struggles. We're not magically healed all of a sudden, even if you have this crazy God encounter. And so for years, I struggled with the judgment of others. I felt like I finally overcame a lot of that around my 30th birthday, but I never healed from the internal judgment that I held for myself. I recently became a mother. As you saw, I have an 11-month-old, and it cracked me open. I suffered from postpartum anxiety. I worried constantly about my child. It wasn't bliss. I don't know what people were talking about it, but being great. I was scared, and intrusive thoughts plagued me. And when I had an intrusive thought, I would judge myself. What is wrong with me? Who even thinks things like this? I would ruminate on my perceived brokenness. Sometimes my anxiety was so intense that all I could do was curl up in a ball with my child, focusing on the next breath. and the breath after that. I just kept thinking, what is wrong with you, Meghan? This can't be so hard. Like, half the planet does this all of the time, and they seem fine. They don't seem fazed by this. And I would just ruminate on this perceived failure of myself. When I got help, which was fortunately very soon, through therapy and meds, I began to realize that my anxiety was not a sign of my failure. It was my mother brain literally rewiring itself to perceive threats everywhere. Did you guys know that happens to your brain? I did not know that, but there's actually a book about it. And so I didn't know that what I was experiencing was actually par for the course for someone who had suffered a miscarriage, a somewhat traumatic birth, and subsequently postpartum anxiety. You see, the distress I experienced from early motherhood and intrusive thoughts and sleep deprivation was one thing, but the judgment that I harbored for myself was an entirely different matter. My natural tendency was to exile those parts of me that weren't perfect. I, who intimately and devastatingly knew the pain of exile, was doing that to myself, was doing it to the parts of myself that I perceived as weak or not perfect. The only way to heal, the only way for any of us to heal, is through self-compassion, through mercy. I learned to start talking to myself in a new way. Hey, Meghan, I know you are feeling broken and really scared right now, and that's okay. What you're doing, helping a little infant and doing it all on little sleep with plummeting hormones, is really hard, and it's okay for it to be hard. You are allowed to be human. You are allowed to struggle. This is not a sin. In some ways, my brokenness is what allowed me to be me on a deeper level, to finally embrace the parts of myself that I had never deemed worthy, that were imperfect. I learned to be with myself in my brokenness, and that is no small thing, and I am still learning it. The concept of withness is something that I want to visit in the light of Jesus from the passage I shared earlier, so I'm going to read it again. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with the tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." Maybe the point of this story is not that Jesus comes to fix the sinners or the tax collectors. I don't see any fixing actually happening in this story. Maybe it's simple as that Jesus comes to be with us, all of us, that the divine is closer to those who have been broken, that he's hanging out with the outcasts. And maybe we can take a lesson from that when we feel broken, it's a reminder that the divine desires to be near. And if Jesus just wants to hang out with the flawed or the outcast, maybe we can finally learn to embrace the parts of ourselves that we have deemed flawed or outcast. In this passage, Jesus also says that he wants mercy, not sacrifice. Can we please stop sacrificing ourselves on the altar of perfection and learn how to show mercy to the parts of ourselves that we have labeled outcast, that we have exiled? I think that is the way to heal, because Jesus didn't come to fix, he came to be with. I want to end with a parable I first encountered in Mallory Wyckoff's book, God Is, and it's about acorns, and it's originally attributed to Maurice Nicoll. Once upon a time, in a land not so far away, there was a kingdom of acorns nestled at the foot of a grand old oak tree. Since the citizens of this kingdom were modern, fully westernized acorns, they went about their life with a purposeful energy. And since they were midlife baby boomer acorns, they engaged in a lot of self-help courses. There were seminars called Getting All You Can Out of Your Shell, and Who Would You Be Without Your Nutty Story? There was woundedness and recovery groups for the acorns who had bruised from the fall from their tree. There were spas for oiling and polishing those shells, and various acornopathic therapies to enhance longevity and well-being. One day, in the midst of this kingdom, there suddenly appeared a naughty little stranger, apparently dropped out of the blue by a passing bird. He was capless and dirty, making an immediate negative impression on his fellow acorns. And to make things worse, crouched beneath the mighty oak tree, he stammered out a wild tale. Pointing up to that tree, he said, "We are that." Delusional thinking, obviously, the other acorns concluded, but one of them continued to engage him in conversation. "So tell us, how would we become that tree?" "Well," he said, pointing downward, "it has something to do with going into the ground and cracking open the shell." "Insane," they responded, "totally morbid. Why? Then we wouldn't be acorns anymore." And I want us to think about that maybe it's those of us who have been cast out of religious elite circles, who have been broken open, who felt buried. Maybe we are the closest to understanding and embracing the sacred divinity that dwells inside. Maybe we are that. Maybe our brokenness and humanity are not a curse, but the gift of being fully alive. May we learn how to embrace it.